and here are my betting ideas. So we're going to kick it off with the main event, which is Stephen Thompson versus Kevin Holland. I think this is a very close matchup. I think if this fight took place a couple years ago, I think this would be, I wouldn't say easy, but I think I would be comfortably picking Stephen Thompson. I think Stephen Thompson's age, along with Kevin Holland's reach, makes this a very tough matchup to predict, I think, in my opinion. Um, and at this point, I think where the line is at with Kevin Holland around a minus 130 to minus 140 favorite makes sense. I think it was close to a toss-up fight, but with where Stephen Thompson is in his career, being 40 years old, as a striker, we haven't seen him go up against anybody with the reach of Kevin Holland, which was something I noticed going back through Stephen Thompson's career. That's something that I think will be maybe difficult for Stephen Thompson. At the same time, Kevin Holland doesn't use his reach to the fullest of its ability, I would say. He likes to come crashing in sometimes, and that could play into Stephen Thompson's advantage. So this is a fight that I personally won't be betting, but I think it will be a ton of fun come fight night. Next up is the co-main event, which is RDA Rafael Dos Anjos taking on Bryan Barberena. This is actually a fight that I've been waiting to bet since it was announced. I really felt like there was a big advantage for RDA in this matchup. He just lost in a close competitive 5-round fight. Yes, he got finished, but I believe he won at least a round in that Fiziev fight, the Battle of the Rafaels. And, I feel like he's still in a good spot in his career. Like, yes, Moicano came in and it was on really short notice and he wasn't prepared for that fight, but RDA still showed a good account of himself, right? And so I think that matters. And I think Barberena will be competitive on the feet, but Barberena doesn't have the power to really hurt, I would say, RDA with one strike. And I think RDA can certainly compete with him on the feet, and we know he's got a big grappling advantage. And we've seen Barberena struggle with the grappling. Now there is the big question mark with RDA saying he only wants one fight. So will he be willing to mix in the grappling? I hope so, because if he does, this is a shoo-in. I did place a bet on RDA at I think I got him at minus 340. He's up around minus 500 right now, so I still think he could make sense as a parlay piece, but as a straight bet, the value is probably not there. Next up, for me at least, is going to be Mark Diakise taking on Michael Johnson. Now, this is a fight where I think, if Mark Diakise wrestles like he has been in his last two fights, this is going to be a decision, and it's going to be 30-27, and it's not going to be very close. The only thing that gives me confidence if I were to be playing the Michael Johnson side is I think Michael Johnson has much better takedown defense than the last two opponents that Mark Diakise has gone up against in Borshev and Hadzovic. Like, I know people can get on Michael Johnson for his overall grappling, but his initial takedown defense, unless he's going up against, the top tier wrestlers, is actually pretty good. It's after that he struggles. And the reason why it's pretty good is he's pretty quick on his feet. And so he can make it difficult for his opponent to time their initial takedown. But once they get him to the mat, he really struggles to get back up. And we've seen Diakise do a tremendous job at keeping guys on the mat. So with that being said, I have Diakise as a minus 185 favorite, somewhere around 65% chance. I'm a little bit lower than where the odds have him currently, is a minus 270. And the reason for that is what I just said previously, that I think Michael Johnson has a better chance at keeping it on the feet. Could this, not pan out too well in my favor? Absolutely. Diakise could easily just go back to what he's been doing, get the takedowns, hold him down for 3 rounds, and win a clear, comfortable decision here. which is, as a prediction is where I would side. But as a bettor, I don't know if there's too much value on Diakise, although I think there's more value on him than some of the other fighters on this card, which I'll get to in a second. Next up for me is going to be Angela Hill versus Emily Ducote. Ducote's UFC debut was against Angela Hill's teammate, Jessica Penne. And Ducote had a tremendous debut. She won easily 30-27. She looked fantastic on the feet. She did a really good job, even though she was the fighter with the shorter reach, establishing her distance on the feet and making it seem like she was the fighter with the reach advantage. And I think that's very important to note in this matchup against Angela Hill, because Hill does a good job of utilizing some of her longer ranged weapons. And so I think this fight is actually a 50-50. It's a pick'em. Even though Angela Hill, is the much older fighter, I think the experience plays in her hands. Ducote had a bit of I wouldn't say, bad stretch, but a bit up and down pre-UFC. So I think maybe people are getting a little too caught up in her UFC debut win, and I think Angela Hill has the ability to get a victory in this matchup against Ducote, where I think whoever is going forward is going to have the advantage, and I think both fighters will have their moments moving forward. I think Angela Hill could win this fight 29-28, and I think this fight has all the recipes for a classic Angela Hill fight where it goes to split decision. So that's something where I will be looking to actually get a little sprinkle on split decision here, because I think there's just too much of a possibility that this fight ends 29-28 either side, and somebody takes a split decision and goes home, and the other fighter feels they won, but they didn't get it done on the scorecards. So next up for me is going to be Darren Elkins versus Jonathan Pierce. Now, this fight I think is going to be, a tough matchup. It could not be a tough matchup. I could be very wrong, but my feeling right now is I think this is going to be a closer fight than the odds suggest. Jonathan Pierce is the much younger fighter. He's got a lot of momentum coming into this fight with, I believe, a 4-fight winning streak. He just got a victory over Makwan Amirkhani, and he's looked really good as of late. Like, his grappling looks good, the striking looks good, although defensively, he's still pretty hittable. And guys, I think that is where this could be some trouble for Jonathan Pierce. Now, there's a world where Pierce just goes out, he takes down Elkins, this isn't close, he wins, a decision, or even gets a third round finish against Darren Elkins. But man, I think Darren Elkins' last performance against Tristan Connolly, although Pierce is much better than Connolly, really showed that Elkins is still there cardio-wise. And I think he'll be able to match some of the grappling of Jonathan Pierce. And when they're inside in that tight distance, that short distance, Darren Elkins, I think, will have the advantage in the striking. So, do I think Darren Elkins wins as a prediction? No. But do I think Jonathan Pierce should be a minus 500 favorite? Absolutely not. I have Jonathan Pierce at minus 175, like 64% of the time. You could argue that's a bit low, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you too much. I understand I'm a bit conservative on Elkins here, on Pierce. But I think Elkins has a reasonable chance. And I do like this fight. I do think it goes the distance more times than not, but I'm not too crazy on that either. Like, I think minus 130, it goes the distance, just based off of their history now and the fact that Elkins is getting up there in age. Yeah, I could see Pierce getting a finish, but I could also see Elkins winning a close decision. Next up for me is Yasmin Yaraguay taking on Estela Nunes. Again, guys, this is a fight that I think is a little bit closer than the line would suggest. So, they're both really good strikers. We've seen Yaraguay have her UFC debut against another prospect in Yasmin Lucindo. This was the fight that was supposed to take place at that UFC San Diego card, but Nunes pulled out. And Uruguay is the hot prospect in this matchup. No question about it. She is the one that the UFC wants to win. The fans are definitely picking her in this matchup. And I do think she deserves to be a pretty big favorite in this fight, but not as big as she is. And the reason for that is Estela Nunes is a very good striker. Now, the problem with Estela Nunes is she tires really quickly, especially after the first round. Now, I think some of that, though, is due to pressure and her opponents mixing in some grappling with her. Now, in the Sam Hughes fight, there was a little bit of grappling, but mostly just the pressure from Sam Hughes. And I think Nunes will do a little bit better job cardio-wise in this fight just because of that factor. And so for that reason, I have Uruguay as a minus 200 favorite compared to where I think she's currently, minus 300. So a little bit more conservative than where the bookies have her currently. Last two fights for me on this card are going to be Nico Price versus Philip Rowe. Now, this is a very intriguing matchup because they're around the same age, but Nico Price has a big experience advantage over Philip Rowe. And Nico Price is also a better wrestler. And we've seen Philip Rowe struggle with the takedown in both of his, or all of his, actually, UFC appearances. All three of them. And so, you can see a path to victory for Nico Price if he's able to mix in the wrestling and hold Philip Rowe down, which Philip Rowe has been able to be held down in previous matchups. But it's a weird thing with Philip Rowe because it's almost like the first round he can be held down, but then once he gets to the second round, it doesn't happen. Or it will happen, but for shorter periods of time. And I think while Nico Price has the experience advantage, he also has much more wear and tear. And I have the odds flipped. I think Philip Rowe should be the slight favorite in this one, whereas the odds right now have Nico Price as like a minus 140 favorite. I have Philip Rowe as a minus 120 favorite. So I went ahead and placed a small wager on Philip Rowe. I think there's a little bit of value on him as the underdog because his striking is much better than Nico Price. And as long as it's on the feet, I think he'll give him problems. I think Nico Price will be able to keep him on the mat, mixing his wrestling and the grappling to his advantage in the first round. But I think as the fight goes on, Philip Rowe will be able to keep it on the feet. So I could see Rowe winning a close decision, 29-28, where he wins round 2 and round 3. Or even a Rowe finish in this one. With that being said, could I see Nico Price winning a decision, 29-28? For sure. But I think there's value on Philip Rowe at this point as the underdog. Last up, this is a big fight, honestly, one I should have gotten to earlier, which is Tai Tuivasa taking on Sergey Pavlovich. Man, I think this is a fun fight. I think this is first off, this fight is not going the distance. I think this is easily over 80% of the time this doesn't go the distance. So as a parlay piece, this definitely makes sense. Under 1.5, I think makes sense as a straight bet, depending on where the odds are. I haven't seen them, to be honest, and I think I may have heard they're kind of high, so maybe it doesn't make too much sense as a straight bet at this point. The value's probably not there. But, it's interesting because at first glance, I was like, okay, I know most people are going to be taking Pavlovich. He's on a streak here. Since he's come back after his layoff, he beat Abdurakhimov pretty easily. He beat Lewis, although there's a little bit of controversy with the finish. But he's looked good. He's looked really good in his 2 fights. And Tuivasa, who was on a big winning streak himself up until the Cyril Gane fight, a lot of people, once you lose a fight, they kind of write you off recency bias. But, man, I thought Tai Tuivasa looked really good in the Cyril Gane fight. And, Pavlovich does have a big reach advantage, but Tuivasa was able to get in on the inside Cyril Gane. And Gane doesn't have quite the reach that Pavlovich has, but he's got much better movement. And so I think Tuivasa does have a legit path to victory here. I think Pavlovich does deserve to be the favorite, but I think it's closer to like 60% of the time, just because Tuivasa, man, he does a tremendous job of getting on the inside and throwing his power punches. And I think, honestly, if this fight wasn't so close to that UFC Paris fight, I would have tied Tuivasa as a slight favorite, like minus 120. But because it is as close to that fight as it is, I think Pavlovich, minus 150 makes sense. So guys, let me know what you think about my bets here for UFC Fight Night, Thompson versus Holland. And I'll see you guys next week. Peace.